So why anybody will want to be I like the fact that
Good evening, Cuckfield. Welcome. Sorry, I'm supposed to be down the front to start this one. Are we on?
Jonathan, you give us a couple of minutes to do the sound check. Andy, you want water? Yeah, that'd be good.
What are we doing? Can you hear me yet? Four. No? Yes. 5. No. All the others. Let's try that.
right, Michael.
I think it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, got it.
Michael Brown, testing.
Definitely on. Looks a bit.
Yeah.
Try again. Okay, still testing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Try that with yours.
Alison Bennett, testing.
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
It's working. It's working.
Did it work?
It should be okay.
Testing.
You can't see there's a lady right in front. There's a lady here. Can you move just to one side just for the moment? Thank you.
You've got the long legs thing. You've got the long legs thing.
Right, please.
Yeah, testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Next, please.
Hello, I think I'm working.
Thank you. Yes.
Always working, just to be clear.
Andy, please.
Oh, hello everyone. Yep. Hello everyone.
Can we try Alison again, please?
Hi, Alison Bennett, how's that?
Okay, good evening, Cuckfield. Warm welcome to you all. Thanks very much for joining us for our exciting question time. My name is Nuala Hampshire. I'm one of the parish councillors with Anstone Staplefield, and we'll be starting right away. Thankfully, we've got Cuckfield Dramatic Society who've been very helpful assisting us with the audio this evening, so thank you very much for them. If there are any technical issues, please do bear with us. Microphones will be available. We're going to have 2 roving microphones.
It's not very clear. It's very muffled.
It's a roving mic.
I'll try and speak more clearly and loudly. Hopefully the mics on stage will be better for you. There is a hearing loop available for those of you who need it. And very importantly, in case of emergency, the exits are located at the side, rear and front of the building. We are expecting the question time session to be timed at 1 hour approximately, and there will be opportunities for you to ask questions. This event is being live streamed, so we do have cameras at the rear of the hall. And you have details of your panel on your programmes that you had on your seat. And that's it. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy the evening. Over to Brad, who is chairing.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. So basically, just a couple of little housekeeping things. As most people probably will get, this is a debate primarily about the Cuck-Stye plan, about Mid-Sussex and the district, and about planning. So although we have Mims, our MP here, generally we don't want to stray too much into national politics if possible. They're the sort of starters. So the first question I wanted to ask before we follow the normal BBC question time thing where members of the audience ask a question and the panel answer it. I just wanted to do a quick straw poll. So could everybody in this room who is in favour of building 1,600 plus houses, please put their hand up. And all those against? Okay, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. So the first question is from Sasha.
Oh, okay. Hi. My question is for Jonathan. Thank you. Thank you very much. Jonathan, I hope you can hear me. It's rumoured that this is a done deal. It's getting back to quite a few people. And I want to know why that's being said, and are we wasting our time?
So thank you, Sasha. So over to Jonathan on my left.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you, Brad and colleagues, for organising this evening. I think the first thing I would say about planning is, firstly, never listen to rumours, and secondly, never listen to developers. Developers will always tell you that what they want is agreed and a done deal, and it's not always the case in my experience. Perhaps if I could just take everyone through where we are and where we're going next. So the Mid-Sussex District Plan is due for its 5-year review. That was required by the planning inspector who considered the current plan that we have, and indeed national policy now requires 5-year plan reviews, and you'll know that the council's planning officers published an initial draft of the plan in January, including the Cuck-Stye Farm site. Following that, I proposed to the Scrutiny Committee that we pause the plan in order to do some further work on a number of issues, including brownfield site delivery, environmental constraints, as well as to lobby government over housing numbers in advance of the Levelling Up white paper, which has now been published, and we've now got some clarity over the way forward for the planning system. And I think really pleasingly, some of the proposals that were published last year in the planning white paper have been largely dropped following lobbying from our MPs and from the District Council. And indeed some of those announcements that will be in the Levelling Up Bill and a new revision to the National Planning Policy Framework that's coming soon are helpful in how we move the plan review forward. And one of those things that's particularly useful is that the duty to cooperate, which is the legal requirement that councils have to accommodate the unmet housing needs of other areas, in our case Crawley, that legal requirement is being removed, and that will give us much greater flexibility over how we plan going forward. And so, as a result of the changes that we're seeing coming forward from government, the Conservative group on the council will be seeking to proceed with a plan review that does not include the Cuck-Stye Farm site.
Can I?
Of course, yeah.
We've got to get around the panel, but thank you for that. I'll come back to you, Jonathan. Just one supplementary on that. So I was, as you know, because you were also on Zoom briefly, but I was at a meeting with Mid-Sussex District Council officers at 10 o'clock this morning, and the words of your Assistant CEO, Judy Holmes, is in the last 6 months, the officers have been carrying on regardless, that's a direct quote, even though you said in the mini that it was all on pause. So the impression I got very clearly, not just me but others, that the officers of Mid-Sussex District Council are going full steam ahead.
No, that's not quite right, Brad, and apologies if that's the impression that was given at the meeting this morning. So what the planning officers have been doing is working on the pause that I proposed at the Scrutiny Committee and the things that we identified at that meeting that needed further work, so such as brownfield, and we're doing further work to look at brownfield capacity across the district. We're required by national policy to engage with site promoters all the time on an ongoing basis, not just this site, but every site across the district to scrutinise what they're putting forward and to better understand it. So that work continues to go on. So that's the context of that comment.
Thank you very much. So I wanted to go next to Andy. Andy Burton is from Cuckfield House.
Yeah, and I'd reiterate that the feedback that I had from the meeting this morning, the officers have told us, all of the parishes, that they were carrying on. In terms of brownfield, they'd identified something like 40 houses that they could put on brownfield, so basically nothing. And you know, things are just carrying on. And what we will see is in a public consultation document coming out soon is a rehash of what we've seen or what we've been told to see previously. So, I mean, I disagree in terms of the clarity of the levelling up bill. It doesn't seem to provide much clarity, and the words that the Secretary of State came out with didn't give me a lot of confidence that things were going to change, and that things like housing numbers were going to change based on the fairly arbitrary Westminster number, based on demand, where the biggest demand is where all the houses are going to go. So yeah, I don't have the same confidence, I'm afraid.
Thank you. And then next would be Alison Bennett.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. I am Alison Bennett. I'm one of the opposition councillors on MSDC. I'm also the parliamentary candidate for the Lib Dems at the next general election. My understanding of what the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill says is it does, as Jonathan said, talk about the duty to cooperate being repealed and replaced, that it will be replaced with a more flexible alignment test. And groups of planning authorities will be able to work together to produce a joint spatial strategy. I'd also add to that that the briefing for district councillors this week made it clear that the new legislation from the Levelling Up Bill won't come into force until 2024. And my understanding is that the district plan needs to be reviewed by 2023. And so the message from officers this week was very much that we had to press ahead under the current legislative framework. Thank you.
And next will be Mims.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. It's good to see you. It's very bright here. This week was the start of the passage of the new Regeneration and Levelling Up Bill, as we've heard. And it's the second reading, so it's been announced to Parliament and was debated this week. In fact, it was a fairly positive proceeding through the early part of this bill, which is pretty unusual. I'm really pleased that the council has put pause on this. I think that took real courage from you, Jonathan, because it's much easier to sit on your hands and say, actually, we're not going to do this. But the reason that Mid-Sussex is such a wonderful and pleasant place to live is because the council, under Jonathan and under Gary, has taken the responsibility of planning very seriously. And it has been under the previous legislation, of which in meetings with Brad and others on this table, and some people in the room, including Councillor Bradbury and Councillor Salisbury, I've been at pains to say the legislation is and is rightly changing. And one of the things that's really important is that the current legislation, which the council is working to, and I would very much put officers who are beavering away doing the work that they have to do versus politicians who make decisions, I would separate those, because those are two different things. They do the work, we make the decisions. And just finally, in regard to the duty to cooperate and the issue and the coastal pressures that we have, the statements this week very much fit with the alignment that we're looking for in Mid-Sussex, making sure that neighbourhood plans, where this community has been at pains to put one together, has a stronger weight. There will be an update to the National Planning Framework Policy. I expect around the committee stage of the bill, certainly by this summer, which will also take into account this. And if people haven't noticed it, this is the Environment Act. It's 2 years of legislation, and I know the environment issues in relation to this site because Pete and I went up and walked it and made it very clear that we were against this because of the environmental impact. None of this is currently in the legislation that the council is having to adhere to. And the changes that you would expect to see in the summer regarding solar panels, diversity, the areas around constraints, etc., will be coming in to the bill this summer. So I'll just quickly conclude on that. So that's why it's really important you don't listen to developers who consistently tell you it's a done deal because they just want you to roll over and go away. And that's not what we as a community and this council will do. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're going to go to the next question. This is from Marie Dormer, who is the lady in green.
The minimum number of houses required for the district plan has more than doubled in recent years to over 7,000 as a result of a government formula that no one seems able to explain. We are now told that planning policy is being changed, but we are given no details. So my question is, can the panel tell us what is going on with regard to the national housing policy and what this means for the proposed development in Cuck-Stye?
Thank you, Marie. So we're going to go to Michael Brown. Michael is from the CPRE, which is a national environmental charity. For those that don't know, it's excellent work. Michael.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I just say that as a charity, we are necessarily apolitical. Please don't interpret anything I may say this evening as in any way partisan in favour of one political party or another. The truth is that planning has been developed over many years, and all politicians of all colours love to dip their fingers in the pig slurry that we call planning and get their hands dirty in it. And I think it would be invidious to give credit to or blame any one party for what we're going to be talking about. All political parties currently have a national policy on the number of new houses that have to be built. Nothing that I have heard in recent days or weeks suggests that any of those policies of any of those parties have changed. The way in which the parties expect to deliver on their national policies as to how many houses should be built requires a process of divvying up amongst the various districts across the country. And that involves working out, using an algorithm, and we all love algorithms, don't we, how to calculate what that district's housing need is. And as long as housing targets are set nationally, there will always have to be this divvying up process. The algorithm that is currently used is a deeply flawed algorithm that exaggerates considerably the number of houses that are actually needed. The real problem we have in this country isn't a housing numbers crisis. What we have is a housing needs crisis based on the types of housing that's needed, and particularly the need for affordability of housing. And that is not tackled through this algorithm in the proper way. But as long as we have this system that involves calculating and divvying up based on an outdated algorithm, we will continue to have, and this council will continue to have, a problem in allocating sites to deliver the number of houses that are nationally required to achieve national targets.
Thank you, Michael. So, Alison, from a Lib Dem point of view, Obviously, you've been on the case at the district, but you're the leader of the opposition, so you're not in power. What would the Lib Dems, were they in power, do differently about the housing number and its problems, as explained there by Michael?
Thank you. So there's two ways to look at this. What would the Liberal Democrats do if they were to form the next government? And I'll leave you to form your own opinions on the likelihood of that. And what would the Liberal Democrats do if they were to control Mid-Sussex District Council? And there is a very real possibility in May next year that the Conservatives may lose control of MSDC for the first time in 24 years. So I would urge you to look carefully at what all the parties are saying in the next 11 months and think about where you're going to cast your vote. So I can't support this need for an extra 7,000 houses in Mid-Sussex, in addition to the 11,000 that have already been allocated in the 2018 district plan. And I can't support it because those 7,000 houses don't solve the housing crisis. They don't solve that problem. What they solve is a problem that MSDC have currently got, that the government formula tells them they need to build another 7,000 houses. And why is it that all the political parties have high housing targets? Because for a very long time we have not built enough houses year on year on year. The estimate is that actually to start tackling the housing crisis nationally, there would be a need to build 340,000 houses per year. What the Lib Dems would do nationally would be to make sure that 40% of what was built would be for social rent, and that would go some way towards beginning to plug the loss of social homes that resulted from Right to Buy in the 1980s.
Sorry to interrupt there, but obviously everyone's got to talk. Is it not true, though, that the Lib Dem housing numbers in all are actually larger?
Yeah, they are, yes. And we're very much a pro-housing party because everybody needs to be able to live in an affordable and secure home and in a safe environment.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. So, Jonathan, you sit on the district, this mystery algorithm. You have to tell us what your take is on it.
So firstly, some reassurance based on the first question. Housing numbers haven't doubled on that number. So the figure that is in the adopted Mid-Sussex district plan that many of you would have taken part in consultations on and towns and parishes were involved in through their neighbourhood plan process, that figure is about 950 houses per year. The standard methodology set by the government that will come into effect in 2023 is about 1,100 houses a year. So it's an increase, yes, but it's not a doubling. Now, I've called for changes in the way that system works. People are right, it is not a perfect system. For example, it uses housing population forecast numbers from 2014 rather than the most up-to-date figures, and the council has continually lobbied government on updating that. There's essentially without getting too technical about it, there's essentially two components of the standard methodology. There's a population projection component, which looks at how many households are expected to be formed in an area over the coming period, and therefore how many homes will you need to accommodate them, and it looks at the affordability of an area, and as people will know, this is a very expensive area, and clearly if you have very constrained supply, that doesn't get better. So those are the two components. Now, I've called for changes in how that works, but actually what we also have to do, unfortunately, is we have to work within the system as it is to ensure that we get the best for Mid-Sussex and for our communities, because it is in nobody's interests to just say it's too difficult, can't be done, we're going to ignore it. That's not fair on people who need to be able to have an affordable home, who need somewhere to live, and actually it's not in the interests of local communities because it means that you don't have a 5-year land supply and you get speculative, unplanned development. And just briefly on Alison's comments, so the Liberal Democrat policy is to increase housing numbers by 26%. That would require about 4,000 more houses to be built in Mid-Sussex over the plan period, so more than 2 more and by farm sites, and the Liberal Democrats voted against having the current Mid-Sussex district plan. And so we would still be in a position, if we'd gone down the route the Liberal Democrats advocated, of not having a plan and having developer-led speculative development that's in no one's interests.
One quick point, when we all heard about this on January the 13th, and it was described in the MIDI here as a housing bombshell, one of the things that you said that you do on behalf of everybody in Cuckfield is write directly to Michael Gove. That was in January, I think. Has he written back?
Yes, the response basically said wait for the levelling up white paper, and we've now got that, and so we know the way forward.
Okay, thanks. Mint.
So in the meantime of Michael Gove's letter, I've been talking and engaging and shaping on this new plan exactly in the way that Jonathan's described. And the Liberal Democrat reality is every time that 4 houses are built, you'll have to find another house. So it's another one on top of that. I totally agree with Jonathan on the impact of the 2014 population numbers. The reality is our population has been rising specifically through the 90s. Uncontrolled border policies that other parties have is very unhelpful, which means again we're under serious housing pressure. So I'll give you an example of the EU settlement scheme. There was 3 million we were expecting for EU settlement. It was actually 6.2 million people who have EU settlement status. We don't have that border policy, we don't have that going forward. So we do need to be looking at changing the baseline from 2014 numbers, because it is putting really large pressure on what we're seeing going forward. In regard to this central arbitrary number, this zonal stuff in the previous plan, I was massively against that. That's the reason it didn't come forward. I do not believe there should be any centralisation of numbers. It should be based on local constraints and needs, and we do have significant housing needs locally. In terms of right to buy under Mrs Thatcher, it's about 1 in 10 households that were able to buy their homes, and the announcements that were made this week, where people will be in the same position with an updated policy again on that, would mean that we'll have more people coming into home ownership, which is really positive, because many people are frankly locked out of that, and we as a council and as a community have to think about those people as equally as we worry about our green fields as well. And actually we have the 4th highest social housing stock in Europe. So, we are very well served, but that costs us £30 billion a year to look after. So we need to find a balance here between housing peoples locally. If there is sell-offs, then people need to have those replacements. I would like to see in the new bill, and I would be lobbying for this, local connections and also covenants, so that homes can be sold locally, they can't Airbnb'd, and they can't be second homes. If we're providing homes, we need them for those local needs to support our local villages, shops and schools. Thank you.
So basically you've said that we want to protect our identity, and you've obviously lobbied Michael Gove. Are you confident then that the white paper becomes law, that these local issues around Cuckfield, not forgetting that in the Northern Arc, a mile or so from here, we've got 3,500 houses in the same parish, that will weigh heavily against not just Cuck-Stye but other developments in the district?
Yeah, and I think it's very unfair on our community to be shaping what we think it will look in 2038. That's miles away. How we live and work and what we need is different. And I understand the new plan will start to have more of a rolling feel, of every 5 years feel, so that we can reflect the local community's changes and needs. We need much more bungalows, we need more work-live places, we need adaptable homes for people as we age and we are living longer and more differently. And we need a planning process that's not adversarial, that works for people. And at the moment it isn't working, and that's why it's absolutely up to me to be shaping and listening. And this is a really helpful meeting, because everything you're saying is what we're working on just right now. And we've got a complete change in that environment bill by 2030 that we absolutely have to deliver. We've got a legal obligation to protect our environment and our communities, and that's not in the previous plan. So it's a massive sea change, and so I don't really want the council continuing to work on the old legislation. I want them to be looking at what's coming forward, and keenly acknowledging that and working together as a community to protect the people that need the right homes locally, but also to keep Mid-Sussex special. The other point as well, if levelling up is really going to work, nobody all needs to live, or not everyone needs to live in the southeast. You know, we have a lot more opportunity with flexible working, hybrid, and the way that we're doing things differently to let people be able to move closer to family, to care, etc. And that planning policy at the moment doesn't support that. We need to do that better. Thank you.
So one point is that when I also heard from the officers today, Jonathan's colleagues at Mid-Sussex, they talked about everything and about what they were doing in the next, what they've been doing during the so-called pause, what they're doing, and their idea that the white paper will become law in 2 years' time was almost off their horizon. You know, their answer was, we're working on the reality now. This may or may not become law in 2024, so it's kind of off our radar. So you think they need a correction at Mid-Sussex to actually focus on the inevitable white paper changes?
Well, they need to spend some time going through the environment bill. And I'm sure CPRE will agree. Now, this isn't blue on blue. This isn't, you know, me be the council or Jonathan. You know, but at the end of the day, the officers will do what they feel is right. And I, as a government minister, I very often have people working on policy that will never see the light. It doesn't mean that you don't stop doing the job you need to do. But for me, it's about pivoting round to what is the priority. We've got the biggest bill in terms of the environment in 2 decades, with legal responsibilities in there, that the new plan and the levelling up, and it's really important to point out, this is a regeneration bill as well. 70 to 80% of jobs in Mid-Sussex are not in the towns. They're in villages, in old farms, in industrial estates. That's part of the regeneration, and the plan is not only about housing, it is about jobs too. Thank you.
Andy.
Thank you, Brad. This isn't about national housing numbers, you know, whether it's 340,000 or 300,000. It's about where you put them. And the fact is that developers don't want to build up north because there's not enough profit up there. And therefore we have to accept the fact that Mid-Sussex is a victim of its own success. You know, it is highly prosperous. The developers can get the maximum profits in this area. I would challenge Jonathan on the housing numbers. If you go back through our neighbourhood plan, it clearly states that in 2014, Mid-Sussex's housing numbers were 525 per year. We're now over 1,000. So it has doubled in the last several years. If the government is keen on levelling up, they should be pointing the developers to the north, to other areas that are under less stress. My main concern that we're talking about a year, 2 years. Nobody's thinking about 50 years. Nobody's thinking about 100 years. And if you want to see what it looks like, just go down to the south coast. And from Brighton to Bognor, it's one urban sprawl with very little gaps. And what my main concern is that in 50 years' time, we're going to see East Grinstead, Woolley, Horsham, Burgess Hill, Hayward Heath, all joined up around the national. It's sandwiched in between the national park and the AONB. Bolney was 1,200. The Northern Arc was 3,500. How many do we need? I mean, how many do we need to provide in Mid-Sussex? And I just say my biggest bugbear, and please, Mims, take this back to Westminster. When asked about the housing numbers at Westminster Source, and I saw it on the local news, housing numbers are set by local councils. Nothing to do with us.
Okay, right, thank you, Andy. So we do need to move on because we're kind of cracking it. One final question on the bigger politics of it all, and that's from a guy called Jeff Seidler, who's in the audience, who was very heavily involved in the campaign for Mayfield Town. So in a wide perspective, Jeff.
I think it was against Mayfield.
Yeah, it was against it, yes, sorry. Yeah, there it is, yeah.
Thank you, Brad. Yes, so I'm chair of LAMS, which is the Locals Against the Mayfield Building Sprawl. We've been spending 7 years fighting in Mid-Sussex, then Horsham, and now back in Mid-Sussex. We've got 2,800 between Albourne and Plan. I think I'd just like to put a couple of questions to what's been said. Firstly, Jonathan, the target is 1,100, is the current target. If you read the council's own, and sorry for the acronym, but Strategic Housing Market Assessment, it actually says the local need is between 525 and 622. That's the local need. So, Mims, that's all that's needed for round here and these people. Secondly, we talked about affordability. And the Bank of England and Michael Gove have all acknowledged that affordability has absolutely nothing to do, or supply has nothing to do with house prices. It's driven by, exactly as Andy said, by developers who say that's how we can get people to put more houses down the southeast. The difference between the 1100 and the 622 is substantially driven by that affordability. It's not needed. And if you read that market assessment, paragraph 661, it actually comes up, it says, we've done a final scenario because clearly there's a gap between what we are needed to deliver and what it says. We scenario which says that we will have inward immigration to Sussex of 1,900 people a year. It goes on to say, oh, by the way, there's never been that many, and there probably won't be that many, in which case the houses won't be built. Is that the way to run our planning?
Thank you. We're going to go to Jonathan Ashett.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, I mean, I've touched on some of this already, which is that, you know, as I've said, the standard methodology formula doesn't reflect solely local housing needs, and we've called for changes in that. But the way the system is, we have to work to that number. And, you know, unfortunately, when you do a job like mine, you have to deal with the reality of the system as well as what you would like it to be, because if we don't do so, then we lose all control over planning locally. I think what we need to be really careful about, though, is that when we see houses built locally, they're not left empty. It's not that they're not built. There is demand for people to live here. And what we've got to do is balance the fact that people want to live in this area with protecting the reasons why they want to live here and what makes our area special. That's the reality of what we have to do. And you know, I understand the point around, you know, inward migration to the county. That is a significant driver of housing demand. But I'm afraid I can't stand at the county boundary and say, you can't come. And so if people are going to move into this area, and there's a lot of people moving out of London, moving out of cities, wanting to live in local areas like ours, there may well be people in this room who've done exactly that. You know, we do actually need to make sure that there are homes for people to live in, because if you artificially control supply and you don't deal with demand, prices will only ever go up. That is just simple economics. And so we will have to have a balance. And what we will do as a council is we will always try and strike that balance between delivering the homes that people need, and you know, there is an affordability issue. There's 2,000 households on the housing register in Mid-Sussex who need an affordable home. You know, there's around 40 of those are in Cuckfield. Not a single affordable home built in Cuckfield in the last 6 years, by the way. And so we need to balance that housing need with protecting our countryside, our infrastructure, and the reasons why people want to live here in the first place.
Michael, thank you.
I have some sympathy with the council's problem about how they work and calculate the number of houses they need in the plan, because it is not set by them. The housing need is set by the at a national level, and it doesn't reflect local need. Jeff, you're absolutely right. There is the problem that the calculation as to what Jonathan has to work to, based on data as to housing projections that are out of date, that we know from subsequent data exaggerate the rate of growth of this country's population and the district's population, and increasingly exaggerate it. But the council is not allowed to use that current data. It exaggerates the number. The second problem, also alluded to, is that the council has to increase the number of houses that it provides by 40% on the premise that if you build more houses, you're going to reduce house prices on simple supply and demand criteria. All the evidence is that it does nothing to reduce housing prices. All the evidence is that it increases the developers' profits, increases the executive bonuses, increases the generosity of political donations. If you did not, if you made just those two changes to the way in which housing needs have to be calculated, changes that are evidence-based, factual, logical, and simple and apolitical, you could reduce. There is a real need for affordable houses, especially in the rural parts of the district. There needs to be targets for that, and they need to be realistic and achievable ones. Thank you.
So, Alison Bennett, the Lib Dems say they won't go for a developer-led situation. They will basically do it differently. How would you do it differently? And also make sure you keep communities on side that deliver affordable housing.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, this phrase, it's a developer-led system, gets trotted out all the time. And to answer, Jeff, your question, no, this is no way to run planning in a developer-led system. The phrase gets trotted out, but what does it mean in practice? It means that when developers have permission on a site, they get to build it at a rate which maintains their profits. And this week, I met with a developer who's doing some work in Hassocks, and he was talking about the start and end date of quite substantial allocation in Hassocks. And he said, oh, the date we finish at will be will depend on how quickly the house is sold, because we want to sell the houses at a rate that gives us a return. That's not saying developers are awful, evil people. It's like they are just being developers. They're there to build houses and deliver a profit. So what's wrong with that is that doesn't meet the needs of you, people who live here and people who want to live here and people who are in overcrowded housing. Another example of site development, of how it's developer-led, is that the sites that are in the frame for this district plan review have been promoted to the council by developers, not the other way around. The council don't go out and say, actually, here's our strategic vision for the next 20 years, and we want to develop this area, and this is where we want to build. They put a call for sites out, and sites come to them that the developers have got land options on that they want to build. So the power is with the developers, and that's not how I think things should be done.
So, Mins, from a Conservative point of view, and you're a government minister, so are you confident that a developer-led direction is the correct one, or would you tweak that when we have this white paper?
First off, in the bill this week, local plans have more weight in law, which is something that I know in Cuckfield, the frustration about local plans. I've been on the neighbourhood plan, I've been a councillor doing all of that work, first in Hesford Point and Fairs Common, and also in Hayward Town and District Council as well. So I know the blood, sweat and tears it takes, and it's really, really important that they have weight, and there'll be 2 rounds of community engagement and best practice coming forward. The issue in Hassocks is, frankly, it was Lib Dem led, and they didn't put in a plan, and it was developer led. Fact.
Apolitical then? What do you mean it was Lib Dem? It's a ridiculous thing.
I was on Hesford Point at Fairs Common Parish Council with people who are now Lib Dem councillors. I know exactly that they're meant to be apolitical, but they're not fully. And the reality in Hassocks is they did not have a local plan. I would just like to add, Michael Gove said this week, and I think this is really important when it comes to constraints and housing numbers, and the pressure that many councils feel about planning inspector and being overridden by numbers. And I would disagree with Andy, actually. Funnily enough, I was in Wakefield this week and up in Leeds as part of my ministerial run. Houses are being built and sold exponentially in the north, and in fact one particular housing site I've been to there is incredibly eco, incredibly green, and it's been selling out in the same way that we're seeing demographic change here. So this is not solely happening in the southeast, and a lot of this has changed through COVID. But Michael this week, as Secretary said, said, and I quote, "He's taking steps on the planning inspector so that it does not impose on local communities an obligation to meet the figures of housing need that cannot be met given the environment or other constraints in a particular community." And I will be holding him to that, and I'm sure you'll help me to do that as well. Thank you.
That's music to my ears, but that's not the message we're getting from Mid-Sussex down the hill. You know, the briefing this morning was, we're ploughing on, we're carrying on because we have to, and until the levelling up bill becomes law, we've just got to keep going. The housing numbers are arbitrary to the extent we had a professional planner a couple of years ago look at the windfall, and that's the number of houses that aren't actually in the plan, they're not actually allocated, and he calculated that Mid-Sussex had got their calculation wrong. And you could reduce the actual number of houses you needed quite substantially by just playing the equation better under the rules, and then you can increase the number that you can take from the windfall. That was kind of largely ignored by Mid-Sussex because it was inconvenient to the plans that they had and the numbers that they had. And our planner couldn't understand why that had happened. In terms of overall numbers, you know, I think we all know that you could build as many houses in the southeast as you like. As has happened since the war. It's never enough. It won't be enough. You could double, you could put 2,000 in Mid-Sussex. It won't be enough. Because all it'll do is fuel demand, and people will come down. People want to see people want to live where the streets are paved with gold, ultimately, and that's the view that people have in London of Mid-Sussex.
Thank you. Very briefly, but it has to be brief. I'll come back to both of you very briefly. Very quickly, I'm going to go back to Jonathan, then Alison, and we're going to throw it out the floor on this topic, because we're going to slightly change gear after this and talk about issues like traffic and environment and so forth. So quickly, Jonathan, very briefly, Jonathan, that's the way we'll cut you off.
Thank you very much. Two really brief points to make. The first is I just wanted to highlight some of the work that we've done to try and avoid the system being completely dictated by developers. And that's what's happening at the Northern Arc, just down the road, because developers were faffing about and doing their own thing and messing around and not delivering. We brought in Homes England, the government's housing agency, to break that up. And what that will result in is a faster level of delivery, essentially so that houses are delivered in a way that meets local needs rather than the commercial priorities of developers. And it's really important that, as an example, because that will upset the housing market a little bit locally, actually. And the second point is that this is a really good panel, Brad, but in the sense there's something from it to really understand how the system works and how we have to try and navigate through these issues. The first is the site promoter for the Cuck-Stye site, or indeed any other site, because councils cannot allocate sites that landowners do not want built over. If you owned a piece of land and you didn't want it built on, you wouldn't want the council to just come and say, you can have some houses built on that. You can't have that. And the second point, and I apologise, I'll briefly finish, is the planning inspector. We have a system where plans go through an independent examination, and so we have to be led by the evidence to ensure the plan passes muster, and we have a plan that ultimately protects our communities.
Thank you. Alison, again, briefly, coming back.
I'll make 2 points. One is that the Lib Dems want to give more powers to local authorities so that they're able to do things like compulsory purchase and stop land banking. And the second point is everybody knows that house prices are high and that they're increasing, 17.3% change in the last year. Land Registry also gives you the price of new builds versus resale prices. In Mid-Sussex, currently, resale prices, so properties that are existing and up for resale, £419,000. New builds, £620,000.
Thank you. Okay, so it's difficult because we've got two people with roving mics, but if anybody wants to ask a question to forward this bit, because we want to hear what you've got to say. Somebody there, sir.
Hi, Ian Howard. I've lived in Sussex for 4 years, but previously I lived in Hertfordshire and Welwyn Hatfield. In Welwyn Hatfield, the council refused to sign off the plan that inspectors told them was necessary. 1,500 houses less, they said we'll sign off that plan. Grant Shapps, their MP, said you should pause while we wait for advice from the government. The government will now come back, and I commend the legislation, and as much as I commend Mims for her thing, The reason that legislation was changed is the Amersham by-election, where the Tories got routed because of planning.
Okay.
But my question is, I completely agree with Andy Burton. I have been in communication with officers here. I've spoken to the number 10 policy unit and a number of politicians. Officers are driving the bus. They do not want this pause. They want to carry on. This plan will take 2 years, this review, by which time new legislation will be out. Mims, what you said, I agree with. You need to get down to Mid-Sussex Council and tell officers they need to pause this until the legislation comes back. We do not need a plan review. We don't need it. And the circumstances that have committed us to it have changed entirely. It needs to be cancelled entirely. Not paused, cancelled. We can come back to it when the legislation is known.
Hi. With all due respect, I've heard tonight an awful lot of political grandstanding. Nobody's actually said what they plan to do about Cuck-Stye. What is in their mind?
Any other questions? Yeah, gentleman there.
Didn't answer the question.
I will. I'm just taking
I hope
two
so.
questions. I will. I'm just trying to gauge the audience.
An answer delayed.
Brian Mayhew, the question that was just asked was exactly the one that I was going to ask. I learnt a lot. I found it very interesting. I thought what Andy Burton said was the most sensible. But I came to this meeting to learn how you were going to stop this development and how you were going to advise us what we should do to help you.
Can you hear me all right? Can you hear okay? Yes. I wanted to move on past the broad brush of numbers of houses. I've been reading the inspector's report on the development plan produced by Mid-Sussex, and there really are some big gaps. For example, he was asked to look at the effect of this number of houses being built between Burgessville and Cuckfield, what effect it would have on Haywards Heath. And the inspector's response was he didn't think it would have any effect on Haywards Heath. The question that should have been asked, and wasn't, was what effect would this number of houses have upon Cuckfield? And that is a gap that needs to be closed.
Okay, thank you. All right, so, do you need a mic? I'm going to do a quick. Yeah. Go for it.
So there's quite a few panellists here tonight, and I just wondered specifically, whose responsibility is it amongst you to try and stop this development if that is your intention?
Thank you, very good question. So thank you very much, specifically the gentleman there. I'm just the conduit, but I will ask and try and get a straight answer.
I think it's the one question everybody in this room wants to ask.
Okay. So the question is, if I can summarise between you, is what are you going to do to make sure that the Cuck-Stye development does not proceed?
And get rid of the political grandstanding, because nobody's interested in it.
Okay. Well, we have said it's not political with a big P, but so I'm going to literally go to the politicians first.
Favours?
I'm sorry that you think that. But if you want to let me speak, I'll say a little bit more. So I can't stop it, but what I have done, and I've been doing since January, is making sure a light gets shone on this and that people across Mid-Sussex know what's proposed. And that is the best I can do as an opposition councillor. The Conservatives got the majority in the district council, they get to vote it through or not.
Okay, thank you. The next, so Jonathan Ash-Edwards on my left there is the leader of the leading group on the district council, as a matter of fact. So in addressing your question very precisely, and he has spoken at length on the subject, but can you, so for the avoidance of any ambiguity or doubt, can you spell out to everybody from Cuckfield and Cuck-Stye in this room categorically how you personally are going to make sure that this Cuck-Stye development will not proceed?
So apologies if I wasn't clear, because I thought I answered the question in my opening question. As I said, as a result of the changes being brought forward by the government in the Levelling Up Bill, the Conservative group on the council will be seeking to proceed with the plan review that does not include the Cuck-Stye farm site.
So you're saying that
I said that at the beginning, that is my position.
So the Conservative group basically have the majority at the district council, don't they? So what you're saying is if the Conservative group vote for what you're suggesting, the Cuck-Stye plan will not be proceeded with?
That's correct. Well, I just need to, just coming back to the first question, no, I'm not caveating it. One of the first questions said, I think someone said, what do we need to do to help? And secondly, someone said, we don't need the plan review. And I just need to address those 2 points, if I may, because it's really critical to the site you're interested in. So the first thing, what can you do to help? The first is when we start work again on the plan, without this site in, if the proposals that I will be putting to the council are agreed, get behind the plan review. Get your parish councils to support the review, write into the consultation to support it. Because the developers will write in saying, you've got it all wrong. Our site's great, do our site instead of other sites. So we will need your help to make sure we're putting forward that argument when it gets to a planning inspector. And to pick up on the point, I think the gentleman over there said, saying we don't need the plan review and we should just give up and not do it. That would be the wrong approach, and it would mean the likelihood of this site happening significantly increases. Whether you like it or not, we have to do a plan review. National policy and the planning inspector who considered the original district plan said you have to do a 5-year plan review, and we have to then do that plan review against the new housing numbers, whether we like it or not. If we don't do a plan review, we will lose the 5-year housing land supply. What happens when that happens is that there is then a presumption in favour of development.
The 5-year land supply is dead in 2 years. Any inspector who forced you to keep that plan review today will lose at judicial...
Respectfully, sir, that's not correct. So the legislation is very clear that the 5-year land supply will only be disengaged if you have an up-to-date plan. So if we have an up-to-date plan, then the 5-year land supply protection happens. If you don't have an up-to-date plan, the 5-year land supply is kicked in. As soon as we're not able to demonstrate a 5-year supply against the housing numbers, developers have a presumption in favour of development. That is a fact, and I can absolutely guarantee you...
You have housing till 2031. You don't need it till 2038.
That isn't true, sir, I'm afraid. I'm really sorry, but that isn't true.
Thank you. Okay, so we're trying to address this very precisely because there's lots of other issues people want to talk about as well. But finally, to mention, in short order, the gentleman there and followed by the other gentleman both said in very plain English, and you're being filmed, as you know, can you tell us that the Cuck-Stye development plan, in your political judgment, will not proceed?
So I'm fully with Jonathan in the fact that the Conservative group is looking for alternatives for this site in the way that he's just described, because I was very mindful that a lot of this is changing, and I know the current registration, but we are changing it, and I'm part of that. So we need to work on those housing numbers, those outdated housing numbers. Part of the work that the team are doing is finding more regeneration and brownfield. But I'll be really honest, as much as I love a question time, and I'm very happy to come and do it on a political basis, I want to be working with you, as the gentleman said, as your voice and as your conduit, working with Jonathan to do this. Because I know back in, was it... I need to check the date on this because I was chatting to Pete Bradbury about it. No, I am. And just give us the answer. So back in 2007, a councillor called Brian Hall promoted that site for development, and it was Peter Bradbury who stood against him and won to stop that site coming forward. So I'll continue to work with Pete because he's been doing that since then, and that gentleman was a Liberal Democrat. So the reality here is we have to work together and stick with the work that's been done, and Pete has been very, very clear that he does not want this site, and we don't need it based on all of the changes, and Andy's described it as well. We have to protect the wider Mid-Sussex, but I want to keep that site, as our video showed, that is special. We do not want joined up communities, and we want to keep Mid-Sussex special. But we have to work together, and yes, it will be political. There's elections coming, that's a fact. But the reality is this is over and above elections. This is about keeping Mid-Sussex special.
So to summarise, then, that's a no. Is that?
No, because it doesn't take it. Yeah, well, I've been said that from day one. And I'll be honest, Brad, I've been bloody pissed off with you about having this night because I've wanted to work together. I don't want it to feel political and question time.
But
I want it
people
to
are
be us.
asking, is it a definite no?
Well,
yes or no?
What, that we want Cuck-Stye?
Yeah.
Nobody wants Cuck-Stye. That's why we're all here on a Friday evening and not in the pub.
So what are we going to...
Well, I said earlier, working on the housing numbers, looking for more brownfield, working with the plan, making sure the planning inspector doesn't override. There's lots of work around constraints coming forward. We have significant constraints when it comes to Southern Water and other areas, and also the Environment Bill. It means that that site, if we work together, will be unviable, and we can absolutely show that to the developers. And I'm sorry that's not becoming clear, but that site does not cover this bill, and we have to prove that.
Let me ask you a question. Scale of 1 to 10, do you think it will happen?
Well, I think we have other viable sites, that, including regeneration. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it should have been in the plan originally. And I've been very clear about that.
Okay, you don't need to...
Yeah.
Andy's
Let me tell you what Cuckfield Parish Council is planning on doing to stop this. After I got off my chair, having learnt about it in the first place, we very quickly contacted Cuck-Stye Staplefield. We've very quickly been instrumental in setting up the Stop Cuck-Stye Action Group. That group is now fully populated, it's chaired, it's constituted, they've got bank accounts being set up. They are going to be looking for donations. We've already, the group has already commissioned a landscape consultant to start looking at what impact is going to have on the landscape. Because let's be clear, this is going to be actually defeated on the detail when it goes to examination. Because the developer is going to make all sorts of assertions that it won't harm the landscape, it won't harm the environment, when we all know that's complete rubbish, it will do. So, but we've got to provide the evidence through to actually make that happen. So, we are going to be holding the political grindstone right there down to the wire. We are going to scrutinise every single word that come out in the plan to make sure that it's the parish council is looking after the interests of Cuckfield, which is why we're here. And I'd urge you to get involved. Please do get involved, because it's evenings like this that the people on this table can see how passionate people are and that people care, because the moment they realise that people don't actually care, it will carry on.
So we're moving on. We're going into traffic. So Giles King has got the next question for us. No microphone.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brad. I don't really hear us. I just want to go off script a little bit, because just sensing the mood of the room, and just reinforce what Andy's just said. And you might guess by what I'm just about to say that I might be a member of that particular action group committee. I just want to give confidence to everybody in the room that we are putting together the best quality team possible and going for the best possible professional advice around the country to fight this particular housing sort of issue problem. And I really just want to say that, because it's not something that I didn't want you all going away thinking there's nothing really happening. Behind the scenes, there are things happening. The group was in a meeting on Monday till 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, working out how best to fight this. So just to give you the confidence, there's some really good people in this village and in Cuck-Stye who are going to fight this to the death. But just bringing this back to actually a question that I was going to ask, and it's a bit more coming from a strategic point of view down to something just a bit more granular, and this relates to the environment and the sustainability of developments. And it's meant traffic and environment. Anybody in this room who lives in this area knows what it's like to drive on the A272 in the morning, in the evening, at lunchtime, in the afternoon, in the late morning. It is extremely congested already. What they're suggesting down the road to add 1,600 homes, maybe that's what, 3,500 cars. You can imagine that one of the top professional advisors we're going for is a transport consultant, because we feel that that is an area, that is an Achilles heel to the developer, Fairfax and Savills. Just mentioning Savills are advising Fairfax, by the way. So we're up against some very professional, very well connected people, so that's why we're going to be as well connected and professional as possible. And sorry, the question to the panel, because I didn't want to go off piece too much, but the question is really around the traffic and congestion. You know, how can you really put 1,600 houses down the road and say that this is going to be a sustainable development when there's already congestion? It's going to impact the environment. Obviously, we all know about the urgency of climate change. So it's all around, you know, traffic, environment. It doesn't add up.
Okay, thanks. So Michael Brown from the Environmental CPR League, go for it.
Right, well, I'm not a specific traffic expert in relation to the A272, merely a passenger up and down it, like the rest of you sometimes. One of the problems with this district plan that we've all been talking about is they plan to allocate 25 sites for development. Every one of those 25 sites is a greenfield site. Every one of them raises issues, particularly the larger sites such as this one, about how you have sustainable transport systems that keep people out of the cars when they're determined to find sites in the middle of the country. Why does the district plan not include any policy to build any houses on the most sustainable site in the entire district, namely Burgess Hill Town Centre? I think just from a practical experience of CPRE campaigning for sustainable development within Sussex, I have to tell you that I'm not aware of a single case in mid-Sussex where traffic arguments have stopped a development. It's a very, very difficult argument to win on because of the ground rules about the need for severe impact and the difficulty of proving that. I wish you well, but there are plenty of other grounds that we will want to use together if this ever gets up in front of an inspector. Remember, we'll have a different council by the time it comes to a planning examination, and we'll have to have a whole range of arguments if this site is either still in the plan, and we're told it won't be, or the developers call on the inspector, which they will, to bring it back into the plan. It's not in the gift of the council, of whatever constitution, finally, actually to determine whether or not this place is built on. They can take it out of the plan, they'll come in front of an inspector, inspectors are likely to listen to the arguments of developers and want to increase the housing target and look for other places. It's just the way the process works. And we'll have to have some very formidable, well-presented professional arguments across a range of issues when the time comes.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, infrastructure issues, and we may come to talk about water, as has already been alluded to, is very few of those can actually stop a development.
And just so actually people know, the current revision of the district plan has now got sign-off from the inspector. They found it sound. And just so people know, within that plan, despite Cuckfield putting up a very strong evidence to the contrary, the Hanley Lane site is included. So that is now in there for 79 houses at the top of the village. And so effectively that is a done deal. That will come forward as a site in due course. Obviously it's not on the same scale as 1,600, but it still increases the housing number. It's not in our neighbourhood plan. It wasn't included as part of our strategy. You might then argue that the neighbourhood plan's been watered down, etc. What we don't know yet is what the traffic implications from the Burgess Hill Northern Arc are. We're told that everybody's going to travel along the newly dualled A2300 to the A23, and we won't see any impacts in Cuckfield at all. I can't believe that, to be perfectly honest. I live on Ardingly Road. We've seen a major impact from the Penland farm. We've seen traffic. In fact, my wife and myself have a how long does it take you to get out the drive this morning an indicator. And sometimes it could be 10 minutes just to get out onto the road because the traffic is continuous up and down Ardingly Road. And that's not a main road. You know, and sometimes I pull out onto London Main, and it takes, the backing up along Ardingly Road it takes 10, 15 minutes. Nobody's thinking about this. There isn't a district-wide traffic plan. How are we going to do this? How are we going to mitigate the issues? Mid-Sussex has to push back to the government. This is what it comes down to. They had to turn around to the government and say, this has got out of hand. This is not sustainable. We're not going to put up with it. And as other councils have done, take them to court if needs be.
Yes.
You know, I did a straw poll in the pub last night. If we were if Cuckfield Parish Council were to double the precept to fight this tooth and nail to get the very best legal advice, who would be in favour? Everybody put their hand up. You know, so if that's what we have to do, if we have to double the precept for the parish councils, that's what we'll do. But we need to make sure that our distinctiveness is preserved. Because that's what people love about the place. You know, we don't want an urban sprawl going from one town to the next.
So, again, on traffic, Mims, what's the government thinking on? Michael says it's not really a viable objection. We all know traffic's chaos around our lovely medieval village. So, what can the government do to help?
So I think that's one of the reasons that I think if we all work together, we can prove this is not a sustainable site for the impact of obviously the Northern Arc and everything that's been described, the infrastructure impact that we have from water that we've seen over the last couple of years. We're particularly vulnerable by the way things are set up in Mid-Sussex, and the water companies will be coming forward with declaring their constraints. At the moment, they just have to say yes. And our water company, pleasingly, is going to say, we just can't. And I'm encouraging them to do it as soon as possible. But in the new legislation, infrastructure providers, including water, will be able to aid local authorities in saying that the constraints are too great. I live in Hayward Heath, not far from the police station. Now, the minute there is any set of traffic lights or any issue between Hayward Heath and Cuckfield, I can't get out of my drive. I know what it's like. So, nobody is immune. There is no massive big grass screen that brings you, separately into Hayward Heath. We are a very integrated community. I fully agree with the reason that it's important that the officers are working on this plan. It should be on the regeneration side of it. It is not ambitious enough because the previous legislation wasn't ambitious enough, but let's admit that's why we're here. And let's make sure the regeneration is properly ambitious and proper brownfield sites are included. But brownfield sites in Mid-Sussex are few and far between. Let's be very honest about that. And I have raised as well, for example, the challenge that we've got around the National Park. Why on earth, for example, despite the National Park being there, is the Shoreham cement work still sitting there looking like that? That is a brownfield site. So if we're actually, but the point is, if we want to save and look after our villages and greenfields, we've got to find viable regenerative sites. And that's equally important in this bill and in this next plan going forward.
Thank you very much. So we're going to move on to a very related subject from James Stedman. He's going to, I don't know, the microphone's anywhere near.
There is a water crisis in Mid-Sussex, and in the summer of 2020, areas including Cuckfield had no water. This was prior to the proposed building of the 3,500 houses in the Northern Arc. My question to the panel is, given the current supply issues, how will another 1,600 plus houses be supplied with enough water? And are there any proposals for a sustainable water supply to mitigate the current water crisis, new developments, and also to protect the environment?
Thank you, James. Jonathan.
Thank you very much for that question. I mean, I've given you the answer around this particular site. I mean, what I would say on the water issues, I was very involved from the council's point of view in some of those challenges, as MIMS was and other local councils were, a couple of years ago particularly, and there've been some more issues recently. The simple truth is that South East Water has not invested enough in their infrastructure locally. That's the truth of it. They have old systems, they don't know where the water is in the system, and it's not resilient and it's vulnerable. So as soon as something goes wrong, they don't know what's gone wrong, it takes an age to fix, and they can't move water around the system quickly enough. The issue actually with those water issues wasn't that there wasn't enough water, the issue was the system was so antiquated, by the time they worked out how to route it around, actually people were taking out the system in those areas as well. And so what we need is South East Water to invest in modern infrastructure that's resilient to meet the needs of our area. And that's the point we've been making to them. And I find it hugely frustrating because they sit there saying it was all very difficult. And actually I'd really love from them a plan saying this is what we need, that MIMS and I can go to government with and say we want to help South East Water fix these problems, let's work together on it. But we never get it from South East Water. And so we need the water companies to up their game and to invest so that we can ensure that we have a more resilient system for everyone.
Alison?
Sorry, could I just say that one of my neighbours works at South East Water, and he says that every time they put in plans to upgrade their systems, which cost a lot of money, the people from Ofwat
who can actually tell them what they're allowed to build and what they're not allowed to build, they cross them off and say, it's too expensive.
And it'll put up the price of water to the consumer, which we do not want.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Alison on water as well. We're going to move on.
Thank you for the question. Shortly after the district plan review was published, and entirely separately, I'm not linking the two, there were reports about plans for a reservoir north of Henfield. I know no more than what you've read in the MIDI on that. So I suppose we're looking at a situation where we need a reservoir in the area if we want to carry on building houses, or we're looking at a point where, like some of our neighbours, Crawley, Brighton Hove, we say actually we've got to a point where we can't build anymore because we can't provide the necessary utilities, the water required, the roads are full, and we say that's it. We need to make the case for unmet need. And the question is, how many more 5-year iterations of this 5-year of the district plan review do we need to go through before we can prove that?
And a very scary fact that came out at the briefing at Mid-Sussex this morning was because there's water scarcity in Horsham and Crawley, according to the Mid-Sussex professionals' assessment, a major risk to us is we already have the unmet housing need of Crawley, Brighton and Horsham anyway. If there's a water issue, we could actually be landing with a whole lot more housing need. But anyway, I'll go to MIMS and we're going to move on water.
I was just looking at the constraints regarding water, but I think Jonathan's absolutely right. The way that the system flows from Barkham through to Bolney into past East Grinstead down to Bolney and through Mid-Sussex, the way that it is structured is incredibly antiquated and really difficult. So I do think air quality and water, and as Jonathan said earlier and in the next iteration, constraints count. Now previously, because we've had to meet Crawley's unmet need and the push from the coast, because the reality is there's water on the other side of it, but not enough housing space. These constraints will make a difference, and I think we've got Air Quality Day coming next week. So the reality is we've got a legally binding framework when it comes to water and air quality for 2030. We've got an Office of Environmental Responsibility, which we haven't had before. It's all government targets and it's legal, and these water companies actually have to adhere to them. So actually we're in a stronger place for all of the reasons described, and I've worked with Jeff at LAMS. They've done a brilliant job of being able to highlight the constraints and the impacts, and it does work when you work together. Whatever party, whatever group, and as long as you get those messages from those people like Southern Water, that actually they just can't serve the customers, And it takes them to be grown up enough to say, as much as we like to, we can't. And we have to be mindful of the bill payer. And I know at the moment the reality is, that we all want to be doing more, but also there's a lot of people with challenges on their back pockets as well, and we need to be mindful of that. So, it's up to them to balance the needs of the community versus what they're paying the shareholders. But if they don't pay the shareholders, then ultimately people's pensions are impacted, but they also need to be putting more into the systems because otherwise bill payers are impacted. So it all's very much linked in, but the reality is the water company cannot provide the number of houses that is potentially coming forward. So again, this means this site is less viable. What we have to point out is the lack of viability of this site, and I think it's clear for everyone to see.
And just briefly, water developers have a right to connect. Under the law, the water companies cannot stop them connecting into, the water companies have to provide them that water. What's going to happen is, us, council taxpayers, pick up the tab for all the additional infrastructure that's required to service those houses. That needs to change.
But that's in the bill.
Thank you very much. Quarter to, we've been going for about an hour and a quarter, and people probably want to enjoy the rest of their Friday nights. We're going to go to the last question from Michael Dykes, if he's around.
My question is largely redundant now, and I don't think we'll enhance the debates, so I'd like to pass.
Okay. So, finally, we've been going for about an hour and a quarter. Hopefully everybody feel like they've had a say, but I'm happy to take any more questions, and if you have any more, I think all of our panel have given their best to state their position and been challenged by the great audience here. But if anybody else has any key things that you're going to say afterwards in the pub that we didn't address, or members didn't answer, or Jonathan or Alison, please put your hand up now. Okay, you have had a say so, but we will come back to you. If there's anybody else. The gentleman there, he needs a microphone.
I'd just like to make an entreaty to those on the panel, in particular those with executive power. You may remember the Jubilee celebrations and singing and songs, and in particular Jerusalem. Well, the last line of William Blake's great poem is England's green and pleasant land. I think that those who are in executive authority must be custodians of trying to preserve what is left of England's green and pleasant land in mid-Sussex, because it is being eaten away. I would also like to say to Jonathan that he has talked about the numbers of people who want to come to mid-Sussex because it is a lovely place to live. We are trying to preserve that as far as we can. We do not want a situation in 10, 20 years where people no longer wish to come to mid-Sussex because it is concreted over. And you, the executive, are the custodians for us to try to preserve our lovely mid-Sussex. And I really hope you do so.
I just want to raise a point of fact. Jonathan said that this will no longer be in the plan. Thank you. If it's no longer in the plan, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's stopped, does it? An inspector can come in and... Yes, that's right. So it not being in the plan is not the final solution.
Yeah, so unfortunately, there is a process, unfortunately, here. So the council puts forward a plan. There'll be a public consultation on it, which is likely to be later in the year. So you'll need to get behind that in terms of the plan moving forward. But yes, eventually, and it's a long process. People have said, we shouldn't be doing anything until 2024. It'll take until 2024, to get to a planning examination. And you're right, we will have to sit there, the council will sit there, in front of a planning inspector appointed by the planning inspectorate, who won't be from the area, and who will go through absolutely everything. And we will have developers and their barristers and their consultants sitting there arguing, frankly, till they're blue in the face that what we've done is wrong, that their site's better, that the housing numbers should be even higher. We've had this before. You know, anyone who saw the passage of the current district plan, yeah, I mean, it got to the absurd levels that developers were saying their own sites weren't viable, so they could bring another site forward. It is a complete industry, and what we will do is, what we've always done, is we will ensure we've got the best representation that we can have, bear in mind we're spending taxpayers' money, to ensure that we defend the final version of the plan. But you are theoretically right, sir. A planning inspector could say, I want your numbers to go higher, I want a different site, go away and make a change. And then we'll have to look again at where we are. Now, our experience recently is that if we have a plan that works, and that's the point I've been making this evening, you have to have a plan. If you have a plan that balances what people want to see locally and the system we have to work within, our experience more recently is you get through that process with a slightly bit of a headache, but you get through the process okay. But that's why it's really important that we have to have a plan and we get behind it as a community, because if we don't, it opens the door to planning inspectors saying, do other things, and developers saying, have my site too.
Pete? Neil?
Good evening, everybody. For those that don't know, my name's been mentioned already. I'm Pete Bradbury. I've had the pleasure to represent Cuckfield on the council for quite a long time now. And I just wanted to make this point, and this is really important. This is not a new site. You heard Min say earlier, and it's entirely true. One of the things that inspired me to stand for the council in 2007 was a plan to build on the Cuckfield bypass, to build Haywards Heath overspill housing on the Cuckfield bypass. Now, do you know what? I stood and won then, and we stopped it then. And we stopped it again in 2009, and I will make you this promise as your representative. I will stop it again, and I will work with everyone that we can and do everything that we can to make sure that this site, which is completely unsuitable from my perspective, there are sound planning reasons why it shouldn't come forward, and I promise you I will do everything that I can to stop it.
Oh, sorry, go for it, madam. The lady at the front, yeah?
I'm just wondering, if you're also against this site, Cuck-Stye site being developed, how it actually got onto the district plan in the first place, and whether you've now changed your minds.
Well, it was promoted by Fairfax. Is there anybody in the room actually out of curiosity from Fairfax? They're all playing golf. Okay. I mean, obviously we've been going on for an hour and 20 minutes. I'm sure, if there's anybody else desperately wants... Kira, yes,
yeah,
go for it, Kira.
My quick point is, how can it be that last weekend Buckingham Palace was all lit up and you've got speeches from William and David Attenborough literally crying out to people to stop, come aware, and we need to protect what natural habitats and wildlife, existing wildlife that we have left. And then on the other hand, at a local level, a site like this, which is wildly inappropriate, has got to this point. Exactly my question, how did it get this far when it's slap bang in the middle of the countryside, teeming with wildlife that will be 100% eradicated if the houses are built?
Okay, in short, Jonathan, I mean, it's a developer-led situation, so Fairfax promoted this site to the district. The district at that time had a need to fulfil housing, is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, as Pete said, this site's been floating around for a very long time. It's not a secret to anyone that this site exists and that landowners and developers want to build on it. And there are limited options in terms of where sites are available in the district. As I said, because of the changes the government's making, we don't believe we'll need to go ahead with it, and we make those changes. But the landowner's not going to go away. The developer's not going to go away, and so it's really important that that community view gets behind the plan as we move forward.
Thank you very much. Okay, the gentleman in the stripy top, yeah?
One question. So why aren't we taxing the hell out of the developers who build on greenfield and give them a tax incentive to build on brownfield?
And so that's why the new bill is levelling up and regeneration bill, for exactly the reasons. The reason that that site is promoted is because, hey, it's next to a road, it's easy to say, oh, we'll give you a community building and a school, and probably the officers said, well, yeah, that's quite a nice, lump of housing for us. That's not good enough for Mid-Sussex, as we've discussed earlier. It means that, again, all of our regeneration areas are left behind, and we then have the challenge of trying to keep Mid-Sussex special. So we're all on the same page on this. There is no doubt about that. We need to keep Mid-Sussex special and regenerate in the way that works for our communities and balance that housing need. But again, I go back to the point earlier that we are basing it on very old numbers. The ONS household projection study has been completely blown out of the water, and it's absolutely right that we get the housing number right, because it does mean that some of the sites, as Jonathan said, that you can take out, which is obviously what they've been able to do, and it's absolutely the right thing to do.
And very last question, because I'm sure people want to go to the pub. Jeffrey successfully and his colleagues, non-parish councillors, I think, all of them, and district councillors, stopped the main field development as far as we can tell. Just tell us the secret, Jeff.
Persistence.
I wish I knew the secret, but I'll ask Jonathan in a second whether or not the Oldbourne site is also in the plan. But separately from that, no, it is absolutely critical that the site is not in the plan. Your position is totally different if it is not in the plan, and you should welcome that. However, if it is not in the plan exactly as been discussed, and I've worked with Michael, Lambs has been through two inspections, firstly with Mid-Sussex in 2015 and Horsham. The council can't necessarily support challenging something that isn't in the plan, because that's not necessarily a good use of council money. That's why Lambs has spent over £180,000 preparing and providing the professional reports that have been used in those two. And that is the sort of understanding you are facing with Fairfax bringing this forward, even if it's not in the plan. That's just my observation to you, and I'll work with Brad.
Thanks very much. So I'm going to wrap it up there. This event's been organised by, as Giles pointed out, the Stop Cuckfield Action Group. There's about 12 hearty individuals which will work with politicians of all persuasions, with Andy at Cuckfield and myself at Cuck-Stye Parish Council, to defeat it. So thanks for coming. There's a website that's going. We're going to start fundraising on Monday, so we need to get more expert reports. But thank you everybody for coming. Thank you very much to Jonathan, Alison, Michael, Mims and Andy, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's my question. I just laughed. But actually, I'm